The first thing I noticed was the smell of diesel on a Tuesday morning, when there shouldn't have been any. I was walking out to my workshop at 6:42 a.m. Coffee still too hot to drink, and the air around the fuel tank had that sharp, oily sweetness that meant someone had been pumping recently. The concrete pad beneath the tank was damp in a pattern that didn't match the morning dew. It matched a spill pattern. Someone had filled something, and they'd been in a hurry doing it. I stood there for a full minute, letting the coffee cool in my hand, staring at the digital meter on the pump. The number was wrong. I knew exactly how many gallons should have been in that tank, because I'd topped it off myself 11 days earlier, after the last concrete pour at the Miller job site. 412 gallons. I'd written it down in the logbook inside the workshop, same as I'd done every month for 6 years. The meter now read 327. 85 gallons gone. In 11 days. My excavator had been parked for 2 weeks, waiting on a transmission part. My dump truck had made exactly one trip to the quarry, and I'd filled it at the commercial pump on Route 9 because I was already there picking up aggregate. Nothing on my property had burned 85 gallons of diesel. I set my coffee on the tank's steel housing and walked back to the workshop. The logbook was on the shelf above my desk, a black and white composition notebook with oil-stained edges and 6 years of fuel records written in my own handwriting. I flipped to the current page. 412 gallons, dated 11 days ago. Below that, nothing. No entries, no notes, no explanation for the missing fuel. But the pump had an electronic log. I'd installed the system 3 years earlier, after a different job site had a problem with after-hours fuel theft. The pump controller recorded every transaction: date, time, duration, gallons dispensed, and a 4-digit access code. You couldn't pump a single drop without punching in a code, and the system logged every attempt, successful or not. I pulled up the log on the controller's small LCD screen. The display was old, the backlight flickering slightly, but the data was clear. In the past 11 days, there had been 14 unauthorized pump events, all of them between 7 a.m. and 9:30 a.m., all of them using the same access code, 7421. I didn't recognize the code. My crew used 3198. My personal code was 0224. The 7421 code had been added to the system, and I hadn't added it. I scrolled through the timestamps. Tuesday of last week, 7:18 a.m., 12.4 gallons. Wednesday, 7:22 a.m., 11.8 gallons. Thursday, 7:15 a.m., 13.1 gallons. Friday, 7:19 a.m., 12.7 gallons. Monday, 7:21 a.m., 11.9 gallons. Tuesday, 7:17 a.m., 12.2 gallons. And on it went. Every weekday morning, like clockwork, someone was pulling up to my tank and helping themselves to 12 or 13 gallons of diesel. I knew exactly who it was before I even checked the camera. The HOA landscaping crew started their rounds at 7 a.m. every weekday. I'd watched them dozens of times from my kitchen window. The white pickup truck with the faded green lettering on the door, the trailer loaded with zero-turn mowers and weed eaters and gas cans. They always started at the community entrance, worked their way through the common areas, and finished at the retention pond behind the clubhouse by late morning. And my fuel tank sat 40 feet from the property line that bordered the HOA's maintenance access road. I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera app. I have 4 cameras on the workshop and the fuel tank area, installed after a break-in attempt 2 years ago. The footage from the past 2 weeks was still on the hard drive. I scrolled to the previous Tuesday at 7:15 a.m. The video was clear. The white HOA landscaping truck pulled off the maintenance road, drove across the grass between the tree line and my tank, and parked next to the pump. A man in a green polo shirt and khaki work pants got out, walked to the pump, punched in a code, and started filling a 5-gallon diesel can, then another. Then he topped off the truck's tank directly from the nozzle. The whole process took about 8 minutes. When he was done, he put the nozzle back, got in the truck, and drove away like it was the most normal thing in the world. I watched the footage from Wednesday. Same man, same truck. Same routine, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday. 14 times in 11 days. 85 gallons of diesel. My diesel. I closed the app and stood in the workshop for a long moment, listening to the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of a mower somewhere in the neighborhood. The coffee was cold now. I poured it out in the sink and made a fresh cup. Before I explain what happened next, Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's out there dealing with their own version of this nonsense. My name is Cole, and I run a small excavation and concrete business. I've owned this property for 12 years. It's 5 acres at the edge of a subdivision called Willow Branch Estates, and when I bought it, the HOA didn't exist yet. The developer was still building Phase 1. My land was outside the plat, unincorporated county land with its own well, its own septic, its own electric service, and its own fuel tank for my equipment. The fuel tank is a 1,000-gallon above-ground diesel tank, double-walled, permitted, inspected, and registered with the County Environmental Health Department. It sits on a reinforced concrete pad behind my workshop, surrounded by a steel bollard cage to prevent vehicle strikes. It's not hidden, it's not ambiguous. It's clearly on my property, clearly marked with my business name, and clearly connected to my workshop's power supply for the pump controller. The HOA maintenance access road runs along the back edge of my property, separated by a line of mature loblolly pines and a split-rail fence that I installed myself 8 years ago. The fence isn't meant to be a security barrier. It's meant to mark the boundary. The actual property line is 15 feet inside the tree line, which means the HOA's road is nowhere near my tank. But the trees are thick, and from the road, you can see the top of the tank's vent pipe if you're looking for it. Someone had been looking for it. I finished my coffee and called my bookkeeper, Elaine. She's been handling my business accounts for 9 years, and she notices everything. If a receipt is off by $3, she'll find it. If a vendor changes their invoice format, she'll call them to confirm. She's the kind of person who treats other people's money like it's her own, and I've never had to worry about a single decimal point since she came on board. Elaine, I said when she picked up, I need you to pull the fuel receipts for the past 6 months. Every delivery, every bulk purchase, every road tax refund. And I need you to cross-reference them against the pump logs I'm about to send you. There was a pause. Elaine doesn't ask unnecessary questions. She just said, "How bad is it?" 85 gallons in 11 days. Maybe more before that. I'm about to find out. I'll have the reports by noon, she said, and hung up. I spent the next 2 hours going through the pump logs in detail. The controller stored data going back 18 months, and I exported everything to a spreadsheet on my laptop. The 7421 code first appeared in the system 8 months earlier. The first transaction was on a Thursday in March, 11.2 gallons, at 7:24 a.m. After that, it was consistent. Every weekday, sometimes Saturday, always between 7 and 9:30 in the morning. The total over 8 months was staggering. I added up the numbers twice to make sure I wasn't making a mistake. 2,347 gallons. At current diesel prices, that was over $9,000. $9,000 of fuel pumped out of my tank by someone who had never asked permission, never offered payment, and never even acknowledged that the fuel belonged to anyone else. I sat at my desk and stared at the spreadsheet. The anger was there, but it was a cold anger, the kind that settles into your bones and stays quiet. I've been in business long enough to know that the first reaction is usually the wrong one. Yelling doesn't recover fuel. Confrontation without documentation just gives the other person time to cover their tracks. So I didn't call the HOA. I didn't call the landscaping company. I didn't go outside and wait by the tank with my arms crossed. I called the fuel supplier. Heritage Fuel and Lubricants had been delivering to my tank for 6 years. I knew the owner, a man named Russell who'd started the company with 1 truck and built it into a regional operation. When I explained what I was seeing in the pump logs, he was quiet for a moment. "You want me to pull your delivery history?" he asked. "I want you to pull everything. Every delivery date, every gallon count, every invoice. And I want you to confirm that no one else has ever ordered fuel for delivery to my tank." "Give me an hour," he said. While I waited, I walked the property line. The split-rail fence was intact, but I found tire tracks in the grass between the tree line and the tank. Not deep ruts, but consistent tracks that had worn a path through the undergrowth. Someone had been driving this route regularly for months. The grass was flattened in 2 parallel lines leading from the maintenance road to the concrete pad. I took photos, I took measurements. I noted the GPS coordinates on my phone. I documented everything the way I'd learned to document job sites, methodically, completely, with timestamps and location data. At 11:30, Elaine called back. "I have the reports. Your fuel costs have been running about 18% higher than they should be, based on your equipment usage logs. I cross-referenced the pump data with your job records. The excess usage started in March and has been consistent ever since. March, I said. Same month the pump logs show the new code. There's something else, Elaine said. I pulled the HOA's public financial statements. They're available on the county property owner's portal. Their landscaping budget line item dropped by almost 40% starting in March. The same month your fuel costs went up. I closed my eyes and let that sink in. The HOA's landscaping costs didn't drop because they found a better deal on mulch. They dropped because they stopped paying for fuel. My fuel. Send me everything, I said. And Elaine, make sure the reports are formatted for a courtroom. Already done, she said. That afternoon, I called the landscaping company directly. The truck in my security footage had a name on the door, Green Path Commercial Services. I found their office number online and asked to speak with the crew chief for the Willow Branch account. A man named Darren came on the line. He sounded tired, the way crew chiefs always sound in the middle of a workday. I introduced myself and explained that I was the property owner adjacent to the HOA maintenance road. I need to ask you about your fueling procedures for the Willow Branch crew, I said. There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. We fuel at the commercial station on Route 9, he said. That's our standard procedure. Then why is your crew filling diesel cans from my private tank every weekday morning? The pause this time was much longer. I don't know anything about that, he said, but his voice had changed. It was careful now, guarded. I have 14 separate video recordings from the past 11 days, showing a Green Path truck, a Green Path employee, and a Green Path trailer pulling up to my fuel tank and pumping diesel. I have pump logs showing the exact dates, times, and gallons. I have 8 months of data showing the same pattern. So I'm going to ask you again, who told your crew they could use my tank? Darren exhaled. I could hear voices in the background, the sound of equipment running. Look, he said, lowering his voice. I was told the tank was part of the HOA's maintenance infrastructure. The facilities chair, Karen, she's the one who gave us the access code. She said the board had approved it. She said the tank was on HOA property. The tank is on my property, I said. It's permitted in my name. It's registered to my business. It's fueled with diesel that I pay for. And Karen has never spoken to me about it, not once. Darren was quiet for a moment. I didn't know, he said. I swear I didn't know. She told us it was community fuel. She gave us the code and said to use it every morning. I believe you, I said. But I need you to put that in writing. I need a statement from you, on Green Path letterhead, explaining exactly what Karen told you, when she told you, and how long your crew has been using my tank. I could lose this contract, he said. You could lose a lot more if you're named in a fuel theft report, I said. I'm not coming after you, Darren. I'm coming after the person who lied to you. But I need your help to do it. He agreed to send the statement by the end of the week. I hung up and added his name to my growing list of witnesses. The next morning, I was in my workshop by 6:30. I had a clear view of the fuel tank through the window, and I'd positioned one of my security cameras to capture a wider angle of the approach from the maintenance road. I didn't have to wait long. At 7:14, the white Green Path truck pulled off the road and drove across the grass toward my tank. I watched through the window as the same man from the videos got out, walked to the pump, and started punching in the code. I stepped out of the workshop and walked toward him. He didn't see me until I was about 20 feet away. When he looked up, his hand was still on the pump handle. Morning, I said. He froze. His eyes went from me to the workshop to the truck and back to me. Morning? That's my fuel you're pumping. He looked at the nozzle in his hand like he'd just noticed it was there. I was told. I know what you were told. I've already spoken to Darren. I know Karen gave you the code. I know she said this was HOA fuel. But it's not. This tank is on my property. It's my diesel, and you've been taking it for 8 months. The man set the nozzle back in the holder. His name was embroidered on his shirt. Marcus. I didn't know, man. I just do what I'm told. I understand, I said. But from this moment forward, you know. If you pump from this tank again, it's theft, and I'll report it. Tell your crew. Tell Darren. Tell Karen. Marcus nodded quickly. Yeah, I'll tell them. He got back in the truck and drove away, leaving the diesel can sitting on the concrete pad, half full. I picked up the can and carried it into the workshop. It was evidence now. I labeled it with the date and time and set it on a shelf. Karen showed up at my front door 3 hours later. I saw her coming up the driveway in a white Lexus SUV, the kind that's never seen a gravel road but somehow always ends up on them. She was wearing a pressed blouse and tailored slacks, and she was holding a clipboard. The clipboard was a prop. I'd seen her carry it at HOA meetings, tapping it with a pen while she talked about landscaping schedules and maintenance budgets. It made her look official. It made people assume she had authority. I opened the door before she could knock. "Karen, Mr. Coleman," she said. Her voice was polished, the kind of voice that's practiced at sounding reasonable even when it's being unreasonable. "I understand there was an incident this morning with one of the landscaping crew members." "There was no incident. I informed an employee of Green Path Commercial Services that he was pumping fuel from my private tank without authorization. He stopped. That's the end of it." Karen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. The fuel tank near the maintenance access road has been part of the HOA's shared maintenance infrastructure for some time now. The board approved its use for landscaping operations back in March." "The board approved the use of my fuel tank?" "The tank is located adjacent to HOA property. It's been used by the landscaping crew for months without issue. At this point, there's an established pattern of community use." I stared at her for a moment. "Karen, that tank is on my property. It's permitted in my name. It's registered to my business. I pay for every gallon of diesel that goes into it. The HOA has never contributed a single cent to its purchase, installation, maintenance, or fueling. There is no easement. There is no shared maintenance agreement. There is no board approval that matters, because the board has no authority over my private property." Her smile tightened. "The tank's proximity to HOA land creates a reasonable assumption of shared use. The landscaping committee has relied on that access for operational continuity. If you'd like to discuss compensation, we can certainly." "Compensation for what? For the 2,347 gallons your crews have already taken?" That stopped her. The clipboard lowered slightly. "I'm not sure where you're getting that number. From the pump logs. Every transaction is recorded. Date, time, duration, gallons, and access code. The code your crews have been using is 7421. It was added to the system 8 months ago. I have video footage of every single fueling event. I have statements from the landscaping crew confirming that you personally gave them the code and told them the tank was HOA property." Karen's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, then calculation, then something harder. "I think you're exaggerating the situation. The landscaping committee made a reasonable determination about shared resources. If you have concerns, you can bring them to the next board meeting." "I'll do that," I said. "But before I do, I want you to put your position in writing. I want an email from you, on HOA letterhead, stating that the board approved the use of my fuel tank and that you personally provided the access code to the landscaping crew. I want it by the end of the week." She blinked. "I don't think that's necessary." "I do, because right now, all I have is your word. And if this goes any further, I want a record of exactly what you're claiming." Karen tapped her clipboard once, twice. "I'll discuss it with the board. You do that. And while you're discussing it, you might want to let them know that the pump logs show every single transaction, every gallon, every date, every code. And that code traces back to the HOA's maintenance account." Her face went still. "What do you mean?" "The access code, 7421. It's not a random number. It's the last 4 digits of the HOA's maintenance account number with the county. I checked. Someone set up that code deliberately, and they used a number that would be easy for the crew to remember but hard to trace back to an individual. Except it does trace back. It traces directly to the HOA's facilities budget." Karen didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back to her Lexus. The clipboard was pressed against her chest like a shield. I watched her drive away, then went back inside and wrote down everything she'd said. Every word, every claim, every contradiction. The email arrived 3 days later, and it was a masterpiece of careful language. Karen wrote that the landscaping committee had identified a fuel source adjacent to HOA property and had authorized its use for operational efficiency. She wrote that the board had reviewed the arrangement and found it consistent with shared maintenance practices. She did not mention my name. She did not mention that the tank was privately owned. She did not mention that no one had ever asked permission. She also copied the entire HOA board on the email. That was her first major mistake. She put her claims in writing and distributed them to 7 other people, creating 7 additional witnesses to her false statements. I forwarded the email to my attorney, a man named David who specialized in property disputes and had helped me with a boundary issue when I first bought the land. His response was short. "This is gold. Don't respond yet. Let me review the pump logs and the video footage." While David reviewed the evidence, I kept documenting. I pulled the county property records for my parcel and the adjacent HOA parcels. I pulled the permit for my fuel tank, which showed the installation date, the inspection records, and my name as the registered owner. I pulled the HOA's articles of incorporation and their covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I pulled the plat map for Willow Branch Estates, which clearly showed my property outside the HOA's boundaries. I also pulled something else, the HOA's facilities budget for the current fiscal year. Elaine had already noticed the drop in landscaping costs, but I wanted to see the full picture. What I found was more than just reduced fuel expenses. The HOA had been allocating funds for landscape equipment maintenance that had also dropped significantly. They'd been charging residents for a service they were partially subsidizing with stolen fuel. The numbers told a clear story. The HOA collected monthly assessments from 247 homes. A portion of those assessments went to the landscaping budget. That budget covered mowing, trimming, mulching, seasonal plantings, and equipment operation. Equipment operation included fuel. When the fuel costs dropped to nearly zero, the budget surplus should have been obvious. But instead of reducing assessments or building reserves, the board had simply reallocated the surplus to other line items, including a facilities-chaired discretionary fund that Karen controlled. I found the discretionary fund in the budget documents, $12,000 allocated for community beautification projects. The fund had been created in February, 1 month before the fuel theft started. By August, it had been spent down to less than $2,000, with expenses listed as miscellaneous supplies and consulting fees. I didn't know yet what those expenses actually were, but I knew they weren't for community beautification. The community looked exactly the same as it had a year earlier. On Friday, Darren's statement arrived. It was 3 pages long, on green path letterhead, signed and dated. He wrote that Karen had contacted him in March to discuss cost-saving measures for the landscaping contract. She had provided the access code 7421 and instructed him to have his crew fuel their equipment from the tank near the maintenance road. She had described the tank as HOA-owned infrastructure and had assured him that the board had approved the arrangement. He wrote that his crew had followed her instructions in good faith and had no reason to believe the tank was privately owned. He also wrote something I hadn't expected. In July, Karen had asked him to modify the fueling schedule to avoid certain times of day. She'd specifically told him to make sure the crew fueled before 8 a.m. and to avoid the tank entirely on weekends. She'd said it was to minimize noise for nearby residents, but Darren now believed it was to avoid detection by me. That was her second major mistake. She'd known the tank was on private property. She'd known the owner might notice, and she'd taken steps to hide the activity rather than seek permission. I added Darren's statement to the folder. The folder was getting thick now. Pump logs, video footage, fuel delivery records, Elaine's financial analysis, county property records, tank permit, HOA budget documents, Karen's email, Darren's statement, and the half-full diesel can with the date and time written on masking tape. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I'd never attended one before. I wasn't a member of the HOA, and I'd never had a reason to care what they discussed in the clubhouse meeting room. But this meeting was different. This meeting was where Karen was going to have to explain why the landscaping budget looked so good. I spent the weekend preparing. I organized the evidence into a binder with labeled tabs. I printed copies of the key documents. I saved the video footage to a USB drive. I wrote a timeline of events from the first unauthorized pump transaction in March to Karen's visit to my front door. I practiced what I was going to say, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted every word to be precise. On Monday, I got an unexpected call from the HOA treasurer, a woman named Patricia. I'd met her once at a community garage sale, and she'd seemed competent but overwhelmed. She was the kind of person who volunteered for the board because no one else would, and then spent 3 years trying to keep the books balanced while everyone else played politics. "Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice tight, "I received a copy of the email Karen sent to the board. I have some concerns. I'm listening. I've been reviewing the landscaping expenses for the past 8 months. The fuel costs are essentially zero. When I asked Karen about it, she said the landscaping company had switched to electric equipment. But I've seen the crews. They're using gas mowers and diesel trucks. They're not electric. They're using my diesel, I said, from my private tank. Karen gave them the access code. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I was afraid of that. I found the discretionary fund expenses. $12,000 allocated and mostly spent. The receipts are vague. Consulting fees paid to a company called KMC Services. KMC? I said. Karen's initials are KMC? Karen Margaret Callahan, Patricia said. I checked the state business registry. KMC Services is a sole proprietorship registered to Karen Callahan. The address is her home address. I let out a slow breath. She's been paying herself with HOA funds. It looks that way. And the payments started right after the landscaping fuel costs dropped. I think she was using the fuel savings to justify the discretionary fund expenses. As long as the overall budget looked balanced, no one asked questions. Until now, I said. Until now. I'm going to request a full audit at the board meeting on Thursday. I wanted you to know. And I wanted to ask if you have documentation I can include in my report. I told her I had everything she needed. She asked if she could come by my workshop the next day to review the evidence. I said yes. Patricia arrived at 10 a.m. on Tuesday with a laptop bag and a look of grim determination. She was in her late 50s, with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She reminded me of Elaine, detail-oriented, unflappable, and quietly furious at anyone who messed with the numbers. We sat at my workbench, and I walked her through the evidence. The pump logs, the video footage, the fuel delivery records, Elaine's financial analysis, Darren's statement, Karen's email, the county records, the tank permit, the HOA budget documents. Patricia took notes the entire time, her pen moving quickly across a legal pad. When I finished, she set the pen down and took off her glasses. This is worse than I thought, she said. The fuel theft is bad enough, but the discretionary fund payments to her own company? That's embezzlement. That's a criminal matter. Are you going to the sheriff? I'm going to present the findings to the board first. If they don't act, I'll go to the sheriff myself. But I think once the other board members see this, they won't have a choice. She asked if she could take copies of the key documents. I'd already made extras. I handed her a folder with everything she needed. One more thing, I said. The pump logs show the access code was added in March, but someone had to physically program that code into the controller. The controller is inside the locked housing on the pump. Someone either picked the lock or had access to the key. Who has keys? Me, my crew chief, and the fuel delivery company. But the delivery company only has a key to the fill port, not the controller housing. And my crew chief has been with me for 8 years. He didn't do this. So someone broke into the controller housing. Or someone had help. The lock wasn't damaged. I checked. Whoever added that code either had a key or knew how to bypass the lock without leaving marks. Patricia wrote that down too. I'll include it in the report. She left at noon, and I spent the rest of the day finishing my preparation for Thursday's meeting. I didn't know exactly how it would play out, but I knew one thing for certain. Karen had no idea how much evidence was about to land on that boardroom table. Thursday arrived gray and humid, the kind of late summer day that makes everything feel heavy. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the clubhouse meeting room. I arrived at 6:45 with my binder under my arm and a USB drive in my pocket. The clubhouse was a low brick building next to the community pool, with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people. When I walked in, about 30 residents were already seated in folding chairs, and the board members were arranging themselves at a long table at the front of the room. Karen was there, wearing a navy blazer and looking composed. She was reviewing a printed agenda and didn't notice me come in. Patricia was at the end of the table, a thick folder in front of her. She caught my eye and gave a small nod. The other board members included the president, a retired engineer named Frank, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, the secretary, a young woman named Alicia, who took minutes on a laptop, and 3 at-large members whose names I didn't know. There was also a man in a suit sitting next to Karen. I recognized him from the HOA's website, the board's attorney, a man named Gregory who specialized in community association law. The meeting started with routine business, minutes from the previous meeting, treasurer's report, committee updates. Karen gave the facilities report, and her voice was smooth and confident. She talked about the landscaping contract, the cost-saving initiatives she'd implemented, and the efficient use of community resources. She didn't mention my fuel tank. She didn't mention the discretionary fund. She made it all sound like good management. When she finished, Frank asked if there were any questions from the board. Patricia raised her hand. "I have some questions about the landscaping budget," she said. "Specifically, the fuel expenses. According to the financial reports, our landscaping fuel costs have been near zero for the past 8 months. Can you explain how that's possible?" Karen's smile didn't waver. "As I mentioned in my report, we've implemented cost-saving measures that have significantly reduced operational expenses. The landscaping committee has been very resourceful." "Resourceful how?" Patricia asked. "What specific measures reduced fuel costs to zero?" "We've optimized the fueling process. The details are in the committee's internal records." "I'd like to see those records." "Because I've been reviewing the budget and I've found some discrepancies." Karen's smile tightened. "I'm happy to discuss this after the meeting, Patricia. We don't need to take up the board's time with—" "I think we do," Patricia said. She opened her folder and pulled out a printed spreadsheet. "This is a summary of the landscaping fuel expenses for the past 18 months. From January through February of this year, we were spending an average of $800 per month on fuel for the landscaping crew. Starting in March, that number dropped to less than $50 per month. That's a 94% reduction. I asked the landscaping company how they were fueling their equipment, and they told me they've been using a private fuel tank located on property adjacent to the maintenance road." A murmur went through the room. Karen's face went still. "That tank," Patricia continued, "is owned by Mr. Coleman, who is here tonight. Mr. Coleman is not a member of this HOA. His property is outside our boundaries, and he has never given anyone permission to use his fuel." The murmur grew louder. Frank leaned forward. "Is this true?" Karen opened her mouth, but before she could speak, I stood up. "It's true. I've documented 2,347 gallons of diesel taken from my tank over the past 8 months. I have pump logs showing every transaction. I have video footage of the landscaping crew fueling at my tank. I have a statement from the crew chief confirming that Karen Callahan personally provided the access code and instructed them to use the tank." I walked to the front of the room and placed the binder on the board table. "Everything is in here. The pump logs, the video files, the crew chief's statement, the fuel delivery records, the county permit for my tank, the property records showing my land is outside HOA jurisdiction, and the email Karen sent to the board 3 days ago, in which she claimed the board had approved the use of my tank as shared maintenance infrastructure." Frank opened the binder. The other board members leaned in to look. Gregory, the attorney, picked up the crew chief's statement and started reading. Karen's face had gone pale. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "The landscaping committee made a reasonable determination based on the tank's location." "The tank is on my property," I said. "It's 40 feet from the property line, behind a fence, clearly marked with my business name. There is no easement, there is no shared maintenance agreement, there is no reasonable determination that justifies 8 months of fuel theft." The board approved. "Show me the board minutes," I said. "Show me the vote. Show me the written authorization. Because I've reviewed 18 months of board meeting minutes, and there is no mention of my fuel tank anywhere." Karen looked at Frank. Frank looked at Patricia. Patricia pulled another document from her folder. "There's more," Patricia said. "When the fuel costs dropped, the budget surplus was reallocated to a discretionary fund controlled by the facilities chair. That fund received $12,000 this fiscal year. The expenses were listed as consulting fees paid to a company called KMC Services." She placed a printout on the table. KMC Services is a sole proprietorship registered to Karen Margaret Callahan. The address on file is her home address. Over the past 8 months, KMC Services has received $11,400 in payments from the HOA's discretionary fund. The room went completely silent. Karen stood up. Those were legitimate consulting fees for community beautification projects." "What projects?" Patricia asked. "Show me the project plans. Show me the receipts. Show me anything that justifies $12,000 in payments to your own company." Karen looked around the room. The residents were staring at her. The board members were staring at her. Gregory had set down the crew chief's statement and was looking at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I think," Gregory said slowly, "that we should continue this discussion in executive session." "I think," Frank said, "that the residents deserve to hear the answer. Karen, did you authorize the landscaping crew to use Mr. Coleman's private fuel tank?" Karen's mouth opened and closed. The landscaping committee. Yes or no? It was a cost-saving measure. The board was aware that we needed to reduce expenses. Did you tell the board the fuel was coming from a private tank? Silence. Did you tell the landscaping company the tank was HOA property? More silence. Did you pay yourself $11,000 from the discretionary fund while the landscaping crew was using stolen fuel? That money was for consulting services. Karen's voice had lost its polish. It was sharp now, defensive. I provided legitimate consulting on community beautification. The payments were approved through proper channels. What channels? Patricia asked. I'm the treasurer. I never approved those payments. The board never voted on them. You submitted the invoices directly to the management company and they paid them without review. That's standard procedure for committee expenses under $500 per transaction. But there were 23 transactions, Patricia said, all under $500. All to KMC services, all approved by you, as facilities chair, without board review. That's not standard procedure. That's structured to avoid oversight. Gregory stood up. I think we need to pause this discussion. There are legal implications here that the board needs to address privately. The legal implications, I said, are that Karen authorized the theft of over $9,000 worth of diesel fuel from my private property. She lied to the landscaping company about the tank's ownership. She lied to the board about the source of the fuel savings. And she appears to have used those savings to funnel HOA funds into her own company. That's not just a board matter. That's a criminal matter. Karen turned to me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. You can't prove any of this. The pump logs could be fabricated. The video could be edited. The crew chief could be lying. The pump logs are electronic records with digital timestamps that can be verified by the manufacturer. The video footage is stored on a secure server with chain of custody documentation. The crew chief's statement is signed and notarized. And every document in that binder has been reviewed by my attorney. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. This has all the video footage. 14 separate fueling events in the past 11 days alone. 8 months of pump log data. I'm happy to play it for the board right now. Frank held up his hand. That won't be necessary. I think we've heard enough. He looked at Karen. I'm calling for a vote to remove Karen Callahan as facilities chair, effective immediately. I'm also calling for a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 2 fiscal years. And I'm recommending that the board refer this matter to the county sheriff's office for investigation. The vote was unanimous. Karen didn't say another word. She gathered her clipboard and her blazer and walked out of the meeting room, her heels clicking on the tile floor. The door closed behind her with a soft thud. The room erupted in conversation. Residents were standing up, asking questions, demanding answers. Frank banged a gavel and called for order, but it took several minutes for the noise to settle. I stayed for the rest of the meeting. The board voted to reimburse me for the stolen fuel at current market rates, plus a 15% surcharge for the unauthorized use of my equipment. They voted to terminate the landscaping contract with GreenPath and solicit new bids. They voted to freeze the discretionary fund and review every expense for the past 2 years. And they voted to hire an independent auditor to examine the HOA's finances. Patricia caught up with me after the meeting adjourned. Thank you, she said. I've been trying to get someone to look at those numbers for months. Karen always had an explanation. She was so confident, so polished. Everyone believed her. People like that mistake confidence for honesty, I said. But records don't lie. Numbers don't lie. She forgot that. The investigation took about 6 weeks. The county sheriff's office reviewed the evidence and opened a case. The forensic auditor found that Karen had embezzled a total of $18,000 from the HOA over 2 years, using the discretionary fund and several other small accounts that lacked proper oversight. The landscaping company cooperated fully and was not charged, though they did lose the Willow Branch contract. Karen was arrested on a Tuesday morning in October. The charges included theft of services, fraud, and embezzlement. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal that required full restitution to both me and the HOA, plus probation and community service. She also had to resign from the board and was barred from serving on any HOA board in the county for 10 years. The HOA reimbursed me for the fuel within 30 days. The check was for $9,842, which covered the diesel at current rates, plus the equipment surcharge. I deposited it and sent a copy of the receipt to Elaine for the business records. The pump controller got a new access code system. I changed all the codes and added a secondary authentication requirement. The split rail fence got a new section where the tire tracks had worn through the grass. I planted some additional shrubs along the property line, not to block the view, but to make the boundary clearer. Darren from Greenpath called me a few weeks after everything settled. He said his company had implemented new procedures for verifying fuel sources on all their contracts. He thanked me for not pursuing charges against his crew. I told him I never blamed the crew. They were just doing what they were told. Patricia became the new facilities chair. She asked me to consult on some of the HOA's maintenance contracts, just to make sure everything was above board. I agreed. It felt good to help fix something that had been broken. The last thing I did was update the logbook in my workshop. I wrote down the reimbursement amount, the date, and a brief note about the resolution. Then I closed the book and put it back on the shelf above my desk. The binder with all the evidence went into a fireproof box in the corner of the workshop. I didn't need it anymore, but I wasn't going to throw it away. Some records are worth keeping. On a cold morning in November, I walked out to the workshop at 6:42 a.m., same as always. The coffee was hot, the air was clean. The fuel tank sat on its concrete pad, the meter reading exactly what it should. I stood there for a moment, listening to the wind move through the loblolly pines, and then I went inside to start my day.